Alright, back. Broly and Invincible, Episode 9. Battle Beast offers to train Broly. Let's get to it. The last of the GDA medical transports lifted off, its engine of fading wine in the dust-choked air. The immediate chaos had been replaced by a hollow, ringing silence. In the ruins of the parking garage, only three figures remained amidst the carnage. Rex Splode leaned heavily against a shattered concrete pillar, gingerly probing a gash on his forehead, his eyes wide with a mixture of residual terror and morbid curiosity, as it flickered between the colossal damage and the source of it all, which was Broly. The Saiyan stood with his head bowed and his shoulders slumped, looking impossibly small despite his massive frame, every line of his body etched with a shame so profound it was a physical presence. "So?" Rex began, his voice hoarse, cutting through the quiet. "Just to be crystal clear, in there," he gestured vaguely at Broly, "that was like a driver getting locked in the trunk of his own car. You were just along for the ride, with no stop button." Broly didn't look up. He simply gave a single slow, devastating nod of confirmation. The admission seemed to cost him what little strength that he had left. Rex let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Damn." His gaze then shifted to Adam Eve, who stood a protected few feet from Broly with her arms crossed. A familiar cynical smirk tugged at Rex's bloody lips. It was the same smirk he used to deflect anything serious, to pretend the world wasn't constantly on the verge of ending. "And you," he said, the smirk widening into a leer. "How the hell did you go all beauty and beast on Big Boy here, huh? One minute he's a world-ending Joe, the next he's a lost puppy because you showed up and gave him a look?" He waggled his eyebrows suggestively. "So what's the deal, Eve, huh? You been taming the beast for the ride, huh? Got a special leash for him?" A vivid hot blush instantly crawled up Broly's neck, curling his cheeks and the tips of his ears. He stared fixedly at the ground, his jaw clenching. It was such a stark human reaction, so at odds with the entity that he had just been that vaporized the whole skyscraper. Eve's response was immediate and icy. She didn't blush. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a tone that could freeze plasma. "Grow up, Rex." The words were sharp and precise like shards of glass. "What I do, or who I spend my time with, is none of your business. It stopped being your business the moment I walked in on you and your little fan club." She gestured dismissively, encompassing the memory of duplicate. "So you can take your pathetic, jealous little insinuations and shove them. Some of us are actually trying to help people, not just make snide comments from the rubble." Rex's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. He opened his mouth to retort, but found no words. Eve had expertly turned his crude jab back on him, reminding him of the betrayal that had shattered their relationship to begin with, and his own lack of moral high ground in the situation. He just scoffed, looking away. Whatever. The brief moment of levity smothered by the heavy truth of the destruction around them, and the complicated unspoken bond between the quiet giant and the girl who had somehow reached him. The air still thick with concrete dust, and the coppery tang of blood seemed to grow colder, as a presence, immense and predatory, manifested from the shadows of the wreckage. Battle Beast emerged, his movements a low rumble of power and pain. He ignored Rex's instinctive flinch and Eve's immediate defensive stance. His singular burning focus was fixed entirely on Broly. He stopped a few paces away, his one good eye, the other was swollen shut, as he appraised the Saiyan. The Leonine warrior was a walking testament to the battle. His fur was matted and dark with his own blood. His armor was in tatters, and he favored one leg, yet his posture remained that of an unconquered king. He tossed a small, rugged-looking communicator device onto the rubble between them. It landed with a definitive clack. "The beast is in you, child." Battle Beast's voice was a gravelly rumble, each word measured and intense. "But it is untamed. A storm without a pilot. What you have is potential. What you lack is form. If you ever wish to transition from a feral juggernaut to a true warrior of battle, a connoisseur of combat rather than its mindless instrument, you contact me with that device." He finally glanced at the unconscious forms being loaded into the distant GDA transports, then back at Broly, his gaze piercing. "In return, you will grant me what was promised today, a worthy final battle, not this messy, uncontrolled release. A true contest fought with intent and skill, worthy of being a warrior's finale. Broly's head lifted his eyes. Now their normal dark hue narrowed into slits. The shame and sorrow were momentarily burned away by a flash of pure hot anger. I don't ever want to be like you, he growled, his voice low and venomous. You hurt my friends, and you hurt people and enjoy it. That is not strength. That is a sickness. Battle Beast didn't even bother looking back. He had already turned, beginning a slow, deliberate walk away from the trio. As he moved, he activated another device on his wrist, and a shimmering violet portal of alien energy ripped open before him. Destiny is unavoidable, boy, he stated, the words not a threat but a simple cold fact, like the laws of gravity. You can either be dragged to ruin by your rage, screaming and powerless, or you can walk a warrior's purpose. The choice is yours, but the beast's return is inevitable. And with that, the legendary warrior stepped through the terror and reality. The portal sealed behind him with a soundless clap, leaving behind only the echo of his prophecy and the small ominous device lying in the rubble. A silent promise of a future that Broly desperately wanted to avoid, but one that now seemed to be closing in from all sides. Before the silence left by Battle Beast's departure could fully settle, a new, more bureaucratic presence arrived. A GDA hovercraft descended silently, and Cecil Stedman stepped out, his sharp suit and trench coat a stark contrast to the apocalyptic surroundings that were before him, his eyes hidden behind his glasses as he performed a slow, methodical sweep of the devastation. The vaporized skyscraper, the collapsed garage, the streets carved with furrows of force. He approached the trio and removed his shades, his focus settling on Broly. Lucky for you, Cecil began, his voice dry and devoid of accusation, merely stating facts. That building you atomized was vacant, undergoing reconstruction. The casualty count from your episode would have been in the hundreds, maybe thousands. Broly turned to face him, the weight of those words hitting him harder than any of Battle Beast's attacks. He saw Cecil not as a man, but as a protector of the entire fragile world that he had nearly shattered. Cecil rotated his body slightly, gesturing with his chin toward the broader area. You know, Broly, you've caused a significant amount of property damage today. The cost will be substantial. He let that hang in the air for a moment before adding, the tone shifting minutely. According to the preliminary reports, the new Guardians of the Globe are all expected to survive. They're tough. The information about their survival was the only lifeline Broly could grasp. It cut through Cecil's talk of damages and statistics. His own voice was rough, choked with an urgency that overrode everything else. I have to go, Broly stated, his eyes already looking past Cecil toward the city and the hospital where they'd been taken. I need to see everybody. I need to see Mark. Without waiting for a dismissal or even a reply, without another glance at the destruction he'd wrought, Broly crouched and launched into the sky. The takeoff was less controlled than usual, a raw burst of pure power that sent a fresh wave of dust and debris skittering across the ground, a final unintentional mark of his turbulent state as he flew desperately toward the only thing that mattered in that moment, which was his friend. The air, still thick with the scent of ozone and pulverized concrete, grew colder as the GDA director's words hung in the silence. Cecil Stedman watched Broly's frantic, dust-kicking departure, his expression unreadable. He then turned his attention to the two remaining heroes. Miss Wilkins, Cecil began, his voice losing its dry, factual edge and gaining a note of genuine, if wary respect. You saved a lot of lives tonight. You may have even saved this entire damn city from being leveled. Your intervention was masterful. We owe you a debt. Rex Splode, leaning against his pillar, let out a pained grunt that was half laugh and a half cough. Yeah, no kidding, Eve. A little sooner would have been nice. Could have saved me a few bruises and a perfectly good panic attack. But hell, you saved our asses. So thanks. The gratitude was gruff and awkward, but it was undeniably sincere. A low murmur began to swell around them as the immediate perimeter, once a sterile combat zone, was now being encroached upon by the city it was meant to protect. A crowd of civilians and journalists, held back by a newly established GDA cordon, was gathering. Their phones were raised, capturing the devastation and the three figures at its center. The whispers were a chaotic blend of awe and terror. Cecil's gaze swept over the gathering crowd as his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. He took a half step closer to Eve and Rex, his voice dropping to a low, confidential tone. meant only for them, a stark contrast to the public praise he just offered. Now, I'm going to be honest with you both, he said, the words carefully measured. What happened here tonight? It sent shockwaves through my agency. The sheer raw power on display. It's forced some old closed files back open. He paused, letting the implication hang in the dusty air. Rex's smirk vanished. Huh? Replaced by a look of dawning comprehension. Oh, shit, he whispered, his eyes widening as he glanced in the direction Broly had flown. You don't think... The official investigation into the death of the Guardians of the Globe is ongoing, Cecil stated, his tone neutral and bureaucratic. One of the working theories is that Broly went berserk and killed the Guardians and beat Omni-Man near to death. The why and how have been the problem. He gestured vaguely at the vaporized skyscraper. The sheer effortless annihilation. After tonight, a new disturbing theory is gaining traction among some of my analysts. They're starting to believe that Broly might have been the culprit, that he clearly has the firepower to take them down, and maybe Omni-Man is covering it up to cover for him since he's his son's best friend. Rex let out a low whistle, running a hand through his hair. Well, Cecil, he sure has the power for it. I just saw him treat that lion beast guy like a tennis ball, and he deleted a building from existence. If anyone on the planet could have done that to the old Guardians, it's him. Adam Eve, who had been listening with her arms crossed, her expression growing colder with each word, finally spoke. Her voice was sharp and absolute, cutting through Rex's cynical pragmatism. I don't believe that for 1 second. Cecil met her defiant gaze. Personally, I don't think he did it either, Eve. The energy signature at the Guardian HQ was anomalous, but it didn't match his particular energy emissions, and his established pattern until tonight was one of avoidance, not aggression. But I don't lead with my gut. I lead with data and possibilities, and right now the possibility that we have a walking, talking, extinction-level event living amongst us, one who was present at both the single greatest massacre of heroes and the single most destructive battle this city has ever seen, is a theory my people are legally and morally obligated to pursue after. He looked from Eve's set jaw to the terrified, fascinated faces of the crowd beyond the barrier. Look, the world is watching now, and they're scared. And they're going to be looking for someone to blame for all this. He didn't say Broly's name, but it echoed in the space between them all the same. Containing this narrative is going to be as difficult as containing the damage. For all our sakes, I hope your faith in him is justified, Eve, because if it's not, we might not survive the truth. The sterile white of the hospital hallway was a jarring contrast to the chaotic, dust-choked ruin Broly had just left. The sharp scent of antiseptic couldn't quite mask the underlying smell of blood and fear. He moved like a ghost through the bustling medical staff, his massive frame feeling cumbersome and out of place, a destructive force intruding on a sanctuary of healing. He found Mark first. Through the glass window of the private ICU room, he saw his friend, small and pale against the stark white sheets, with tubes and wires snaked from his arms and a monitor beeped a steady, reassuring rhythm beside him. The image of Mark, bleeding and broken under Battlebeast's foot, flashed within Broly's mind, a fresh wave of nausea and self-loathing gripping him. He had been the cause of that. His failure to control his power and keeping himself suppressed had created the opening for that final, devastating blow from Battlebeast. He couldn't bring himself to enter. His presence felt like a contamination as he stood there, paralyzed by guilt. He saw her, Amber, sitting alone on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area just down the hall, with her shoulders slumped, and she was quietly crying into her hands, with her whole body shaking with silent, helpless sobs. Broly's instinct was to retreat, to vanish. He was the last person she would want to see, but the memory of Mark's unwavering loyalty, his desperate charge to save him, rooted Broly to the spot. He owed this. Swallowing the thick knot of emotion within his throat, he walked over, his footsteps unnaturally quiet, on the linoleum floor. Amber flinched as his shadow fell over her. She looked up with her eyes red-rimmed and wide with a mixture of surprise and residual fear. She knew who he was and what he was capable of. Broly didn't know what to say. Words were never his strength. He just stood there for a moment, a mountain of silent apology, before he managed to force the words out, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He will be fine, Broly said, the statement feeling both like a hope and a promise he had no right to make. Mark is strong, stubborn. He will get better. Amber stared at him, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She seemed to be searching his face, looking past the fearsome exterior, and for a moment she saw not the monster from the news feeds, but the friend Mark always spoke of, the one who was quiet, who loved the Graysons, cooking, who was trying so hard to be normal. She gave a shaky, tentative nod and a fragile understanding passing between them. Unable to bear the weight of her gaze any longer, Broly gave a curt nod and turned away. His next duty was even harder. He moved down the hall, peering into the other rooms. He saw Black Samson, with his chest and arm in a complex cast, sedated but stable. He saw copies of Duplicate looking in the mirrors at the still forms of her comrades. Then he came to Monster Girl's room, and she was in her human form, a small, young-looking girl, unconscious, with her face pale and peaceful in stark contrast to the massive, life-threatening wound that he had inflicted on her other form. The sight was a physical blow. He had done this. His fist had torn through her side, like tissue paper. From the doorway of the room opposite, a low synthesized voice cracked with static spoke. "Come to survey the damage you caused." Broly turned. It was Robot, or another metal doll he controlled. His optical sensors burned into Broly. "You are a devastating weapon that lacks the safety," Robot stated, his voice cold and devoid of the calculated calm from the battle. "Tonight, you proved it. You are as great a threat as any we have ever faced. Remember that. When you look at them, remember that you are the reason that they are here right now." The words were a final brutal condemnation. Broly had no defense. He looked from Robot's orange metal form to Monster Girl's small steel body, back to the distant room where Mark lay. He was not a protector. He was a destroyer. Without a word, he turned and walked away, the hospital walls closing in around him, each closed door a monument to his failure. The sterile, antiseptic air of the hospital hallway felt like a cage as Broly moved like a ghost, the weight of his own existence a physical burden after seeing his friends broken and bleeding because of him. Well, really, friend, he didn't really know the Guardians like that. He was making for the exit, desperate for the open sky, when he nearly collided with them. Debbie Grayson's face was a mask of raw, maternal terror, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Nolan was a stoic pillar beside her, a hand on her back, but his gaze was sharp, taking in everything. "Broly!" Debbie's voice was a choked whisper. She didn't hesitate. She surged forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. The gesture was so trusting, so maternal. It felt like a brand of shame on his skin. "They called us. They said there was an attack. Is Mark?" Broly's own voice was rough, the words sticking in his throat. "He is stable. The doctor said he will recover." He couldn't bring himself to say the rest he didn't say because of me. "He's here because of me." Debbie sobbed with relief, her grip tightening. "Thank God. Oh, thank God." Over her shoulder, Nolan's eyes met Broly's. There was no relief in them, only a deep, calculating appraisal. He waited a moment, letting Debbie's emotional wave crest before he spoke, his voice a low, calm rumble that cut through the hospital's tense silence. "Debbie, why don't you go on ahead to his room? I'll be right there." Nodding, sniffling, Debbie gave Broly one last grateful squeeze before hurrying down the hall, her footsteps echoing. Now it was just the two of them. Nolan didn't speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, his gaze unwavering, before he slowly, deliberately placed a heavy hand on Broly's shoulder. The grip was firm, paternal, but it felt to Broly like the weight of a judgment. "I saw the news feeds, the aftermath," Nolan began, his tone measured, devoid of accusation, which somehow made it worse. "What happened tonight was a catastrophe. That beast could have inflicted unimaginable damage." He paused, his eyes searching Broly's face, seeing the profound shame and self-loathing there. "This was the opening he needed. But you were there," Nolan continued. "You were there," Nolan continued, his voice dropping, becoming almost confidential. "You stood with my son, and from what I've pieced together, you intervened with that maniac when that maniac had him dead to rights." He squeezed Broly's shoulder, a gesture of grim solidarity. "What happened after, the loss of control, that is a tragedy, and it's a problem we would need to address. But in that single moment, you might have saved Mark from a far worse fate. For that, you have my gratitude." The words were perfectly crafted, a master class of manipulation. They acknowledged the destruction without condemning him for it, creating a bond of shared traumatic experience. They painted Broly not as the cause of the disaster, but as a flawed, yet crucial defender within it. Inwardly, Nolan was satisfied. The boy was isolated, terrified of his own power, and racked with guilt. By offering this twist form of absolution, he was not calming the storm, he was ensuring that when it erupted again, it would be pointed in the direction of his choosing. He was tethering the most powerful weapon on the planet to his family, and in doing so, to him. Weeks pled together in the quiet room of the Grayson house. For Broly, the relentless march of time didn't bring healing, it only allowed the guilt to settle deeper, becoming a fossilized layer of his being. He moved through the rooms like a specter, his massive frame seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The vibrant, chaotic world outside of the window felt like a distant planet he had been banished from. The door to his room was open to crack inside. Mark, now fully healed and buzzing with restored energy, was stuffing a backpack. Amber stood in the hallway, a supportive smile on her face. "Are you sure you don't want to come, man?" Mark asked, his voice careful but earnest. "It's just a college tour. Get some air, see something that isn't, these four walls." Broly didn't even look up where he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. The invitation was a well-intentioned lifeline, but to him it felt like being asked to walk through a minefield with a trimmer. The outside world was full of triggers, loud noises, crowded spaces, violence, and the constant low-grade hum of a city he could level with a single misplaced thought. "I am fine here," he murmured, the lie tasting like ash. "You should go. It is your future." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken worry. They could all see the rut he was in, a trench of self-imposed exile dug with the shovel of his own fear. He hadn't set foot beyond the backyard since the night he was carried back from the casino, trembling and hollowed out. He was a sword that had tasted its own sharpness. It was now terrified to leave his scabbard. As their car pulled away from the curb, Debbie came to stand in the doorway, her expression soft with maternal concern. "They just want you to be okay, honey." Broly finally lifted his gaze, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for a fleeting second before returning to his hands. "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. And that was the cruelest part of it all. He knew that they cared. He knew that they were trying to pull him out. But the rut was his penance, the only place where the monster inside him felt safely, miserably contained. The world outside was for people like Mark and Amber, for builders and for dreamers. His place was in the quiet, where the only thing he could break was his own spirit. The afternoon sun cast long, lazy shadows across Broly's room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He sat in the same chair he'd occupied for days, a silent monument to his own guilt. The world outside his window a vibrant painting. He felt no right to enter. Then a gentle tap on the glass was so alien to the quiet of the house that it took a moment for his mind to even register it. He turned, his movement slow with disuse, and felt a jolt of surprise. Adam Eve hovered just outside, her form silhouetted against the bright sky. The sun caught the edges of her pink and white uniform, making her seem like a visitation from another more colorful world. Her expression wasn't one of pity or caution, but a determined, almost challenging smile. Pushing the window open, the humid summer air rushed in, a stark contrast to the stagnant atmosphere of his room. "Eve?" he rumbled, his voice rough from lack of use. "What are you doing here?" I'm done waiting for the world to get better on its own," she stated, her voice clear and firm. She gestured with her chin, taking in the neighborhood, the city beyond. "I'm going to start building the world I actually want to live in. I'm not asking for permission." Broly's brow furrowed in a genuine confusion. The statement was too vast and too abstract for his current state of mind, which was preoccupied with containment and damage control. "What world?" he asked, his tone not skeptical but genuinely lost. The concept of actively shaping a future felt like a language he'd long forgotten. Instead of answering with more words, Eve's smile widened. She tilted her head toward the ground below. "Come on. Fly with me." It wasn't a plea or a gentle suggestion. It was an invitation to a mission. For a long moment, Broly hesitated, the safety of his four walls whispering of its false comfort. But the determination in her eyes was a force he hadn't encountered in weeks. Without another word, he turned from the window, his decision made. He moved toward his bedroom door, his heavy footsteps on the stairs signaling a small but significant crack in the walls of his self-imposed prison. He didn't know what she meant, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to go outside and find out. So yeah, that's the aftermath of Broly's Berserk, Catch you on the next one. Peace. Like, share, subscribe, all that. Super chat's open. Gone.